Big story today in the NFL is also related to quarterback. But the big story is about a quarterback that is moving, not about a quarterback that is staying put. The Seattle Seahawks have agreed to trade Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos. They get 3 players in return, and they get a pick.
Multiple picks. So we now have, since I sent this, more details. So Seattle is getting Drew Lock, Shelby Harris, and Noah Fant, which is a good pickup for Seattle, by the way.
Okay.
Plus
Noah Fant, defensive lineman Shelby Harris, quarterback Drew Lock.
And 5 picks, 2 first rounds, presumably 1 this year and next year, 2 seconds, and a 5th. And also, for what it's worth, a 4th round pick is also being given to Seattle.
2 firsts,
or excuse me, is being given to Denver. So Denver gets Russell Wilson and a 4th. Seattle gets Locke, Harris, Fant, 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a 5th. That's a haul.
Yeah, that's a steep price. Let's talk about whether or not it makes sense.
Is it a steep price?
Well,
is there a price you're not willing to pay for a elite quarterback?
Well, and that's where I was headed with that is this is a Denver roster that's pretty good. They have needed to be better at quarterback. They've needed to be better at quarterback since Peyton Manning. But if we remember, Peyton Manning's last year, he wasn't great. They had an elite defense, and he was pretty good. They won that Super Bowl because of the defense. Quarterbacks get all the credit. That's fine. Denver has not had an answer at quarterback. They just got their answer. And they got a guy who's proven that he can play well in poor conditions, right? Seattle is not Denver. It's not as cold as Denver, and you don't deal with snow. But, man, they play in some crummy conditions. November, December, early January in Seattle. And so I don't think you – and plus he played at Wisconsin his last year, right? You've seen – that Russell Wilson can play at a high level in bad conditions. And it's really only the last month or so of the season, even in Denver, that the conditions get bad outside of a weird October snowstorm. They might have a game in October where it's, 31 and snowing, and then the next week have a game where it's 70 and sunny. That's just kind of how the weather goes. Anyway, this trade was not about whether or not a guy can play in the snow or not. It was about getting an elite quarterback. And Denver did that. So what was the rationale for Seattle? Why do you give up a player like Russell Wilson? It's about being able to rebuild, right? Because if Denver has a complete roster that was missing a quarterback, Seattle had a roster that included a great quarterback, a couple of good receivers, and then a lot of holes.
Well, there was some contention as well. I think I've seen some people today. Why would you ever trade Russell Wilson? Because he's told you for 2 years now he wants to be. Remember this time last year he gave the Seahawks a list of places that, hey, I don't want to be traded, but here's the list right here. Send me here. There's been something going on with him in the franchise. And on top of that, he is 33. That's not old, but it's not young anymore.
No.
So he's 33, had his worst year, in his career this past season? Since 2012 anyway, statistically his worst year. So you've got a reportedly, to some degree, unhappy quarterback who is approaching getting up there in age, who regressed at least somewhat, who has a ton of value still. This is a perfect time to move him if you're Seattle. It's a perfect time because look at what they got in return for him. They've got so much flexibility and so much capital, and on top of that, they got a really good tight end to pair with Lockhart and Metcalf.
So here's my question. Make it a little more local. Unless you just really like Drew Lock, and I don't see why you would. Was this a deal the Saints couldn't pull off? surely the Saints had enough capital to get a deal like this done. Why not? Why wouldn't they do it? I mean, Winston, a couple more players and some picks.
Isn't Winston a free? Winston's a free agent though, so you would have had to have sent
do a
Taysom.
Sign and trade. Well, what?
But that's the thing.
I can't get him on the plane fast enough. What are you talking about?
Well, Seattle's got to agree to it too.
It's like, I'll send him a king cake to go with it. At that point, my goodness.
Maybe Seattle didn't want him.
I guess. I just don't know. Surely they could have done a sign and trade. They could have gotten Winston to agree to a deal. If he's going to Seattle, be the starter.
Russell Wilson, was New Orleans on his list last year?
It was.
It was.
Okay.
But, I mean, and maybe for him, because remember, he had to agree to this. He has a no-trade clause. He had to agree to go to Denver today. He could have said no, and this whole thing would have been blown up. Maybe they weren't on the list anymore. Maybe with Peyton leaving, he decided not New Orleans anymore. I don't know Pete Carmichael. I don't know Dennis Allen. I don't know what Pete Carmichael can do with quarterbacks. I know what Sean Payton can do with quarterbacks. He'll be on Fox next year. New Orleans is off my list. It's possible that was the case, too.
Story to ESPN from Adam Schefter says that this is a deal that has been 2 weeks in the making, that Seattle was dealing with Denver general manager George Patton. He initiated trade talks with Seattle at least 2 weeks ago, and it really heated up in the last couple of days, and it had nothing to do, according to sources, with Aaron Rodgers' decision to return to Green Bay, and that Russell Wilson was indeed the Broncos' plan A. It's 33-year-old versus 38-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, that in and of itself kind of makes sense. And you've got Russell Wilson under contract for what? 4 years? 5 years?
I think it's less than that. I think it's 2.
Is that all that's left on it?
I believe so. Let me double check just to make sure.
C-Spire text line is open at 601-879-4395.
2 years left, yeah. So he signed a 4-year, $140 million contract in 19. But the presumption is, I mean, I doubt he would jump a third time or to a third team. Maybe he would, but quarterbacks don't move very often. That's what makes this unique, especially good ones. You don't trade good quarterbacks in their prime. Like this whole thing about Aaron Rodgers and maybe leaving, that's unprecedented. Tom Brady was in his 40s before he was able to go or chose to go somewhere else before he was forced out. Ben Roethlisberger was in Pittsburgh forever. I mean, Brett Favre didn't move until Green Bay moved from him. He didn't have a choice. He had to leave Green Bay because he was aging, and his later years kind of showed that. Despite taking the Vikings to an NFC championship, did throw an interception that cost his team that game.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Remember that, Hadad? Yeah, that happened. So this kind of stuff just doesn't happen very often because quarterbacks tend to kind of stay where they are their whole career, and they only move if they stink or if they're old. That's really kind of how this works.
So Hadad said a second ago to make this local, let's make it even more local.
Yes.
I made that joke yesterday. It is abundantly clear after we saw Matt Corral talking with Pete Carroll and Lane Kiffin and Monty Kiffin at the Combine that Russell Wilson is out and Matt Corral is going to be the starting quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks. I couldn't even say it with a straight face yesterday.
I mean, the Seattle's now
here
a team.
We are.
Yeah, that draft capital. They would be looking to draft a quarterback at some point. I told you guys this morning, Dane Brugler put out a new mock draft today that he dropped Corral all the way down into the late second round, 52nd pick overall to the Steelers. But now with the Seahawks opening up a spot, I mean, when somebody wants a quarterback, it's a chain reaction, right? So even if he's not the QB1, he's moving up boards because now a new team wants a quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, why not?
I'm having trouble understanding, and we'll talk about this when we come back, how you drop Matt Corral to 52. Dan Brugler's really, really good at his job. Most of these guys that do draft analysis and projections and whatever are good. So the national guys that really lock in on this, that doesn't make any sense to me. Unless teams are really concerned about health or are really frustrated that they've not seen him throw and do things while watching other guys throw. I think there's a good chance you guys are surprised come draft day when it comes to Corral. If I'm Corral, I really don't want to go to Seattle. Pittsburgh would actually be an awesome place. I don't know. The QBs this year are good, but not great. So teams aren't just jumping at the opportunity to draft these guys. I think it's an interesting year. I agree that this is a weaker quarterback draft class on paper going in. We've said that before, though, and teams always reach. Always.
Always.
They take guys that they believe are second-day picks, and they pick them in the first 15 picks.
And it bears repeating, he has not thrown for scouts yet post-Sugar Bowl injury. That has not happened yet. That hadn't happened. So until it does, there's going to be skepticism. For all this falling that's going on, it can completely counteract that looking healthy here in, 2.5 weeks? If he has his pro day and he looks 100%, he zips the ball around, he's got that quick release, and everything appears to be 100, as the kids say, I think they still say, then he'll move right back up.
How do you do, fellow kids?
There's right now an air of doubt because they haven't seen it yet. The only thing they've seen is him in interviews. Apparently those went well, but until you throw, it doesn't matter how well you interview.
There is 2 seasons worth of video of him as a starting quarterback in the SEC. And he's just sprained his ankle.
There is, but they've seen other guys work out in front of their faces, in person. They've seen them at Senior Bowl and at Combine and stuff. That matters. It absolutely matters. You've seen guys rise and fall because of Senior Bowl and Combine and Pro Day performances, and he's no exception. What's interesting about Seattle to me, though, is 9 is the pick they have now. So they didn't have a first-round pick before the Wilson trade in a separate deal. So their first pick was going to be 41. Well, obviously now they have 9, and they've got some extra draft capital. If the reports are true and they are interested in him, 9 seems like a stretch. So do they make a pick for a position of need at 9, use that capital? I hate to make this comparison, but this is what they did, and pull Cleveland Browns and trade back into the first round to get their quarterback this time, hopefully better than Johnny Manziel. That could be something that I see happening is they pick a defensive end or whatever they need at 9, and you see Pickett go off the board, and you see Willis go off the board, and somehow, some way, somebody is going to pick Sam Howell ahead of Matt Corral if that happens. And then, you're hovering around 18 and say you've got New Orleans there that isn't in love with anybody because apparently they may not be in love with anybody. And they're willing to trade you that pick to maybe even fall out of the first or whatever. And you slide back in and you take your quarterback and move forward that way. They've got flexibility and options now because of all the picks they got from this trade. They're interesting now for him. I don't think it's at number 9, though.
Draft season catchphrase. There are a few of them. It only takes one team to like you.
Yeah.
The example is Tim Tebow going as a first-round quarterback to the Broncos. It only takes one team. There's only one team that liked Tim Tebow as a first-round quarterback, and they went and got him. Number 2, catchphrase, NFL draft style. When a team decides they want a guy, when they zero in on a guy, they go get their guy. Because once you have locked in on who you want, you've become comfortable with that, you get really, really scared about what somebody else may think about your guy. You don't tell anybody that he's your guy, but what if Seattle really likes him? Just using Matt Corral as an example. I mean, this could apply to lots of different people. And they think that they can get him at, and I'm using random numbers. I'm not going to 52 necessarily, which I think is where he's projected right now to Pittsburgh. They think they can get him at 37. Pretty sure they can get him at 31. Might be able to jump into the 20s and get him at 19, 20, 21. But you're not entirely sure there's not another team that's got their eye on him also. And so you have a pick at 9, and he is your guy. I say, well, you got to go get your guy because he was our guy. It's kind of like a game of, it's not chicken. It's like, I don't know. Is it Clue? Are you kind of trying to figure out everything else that's going on so that that's probably a bad example.
It's more like chicken. It's more like chicken.
When we saw it
more
last
like who's
year,
going to blink first.
When San Francisco made the trade, how many different reports came out about why they made that trade? They traded up for Mac Jones. Oh, they traded, but they don't know who their guy is yet. They're still evaluating. All of this misinformation, to use a political term. I don't know if you call it political, but all kinds of stuff was just thrown out there, all coming from San Francisco and other people, but they made that trade knowing who they were going to pick. They knew exactly who they were picking. It was Trey Lance. That's who they wanted. That's why they made the move. But there were smoke screens for weeks until the draft. I don't know why they did it. If they had their guy, they had their guy. But that's how this works. There's going to be leaked information and reporting and stuff specifically about quarterbacks between now and the draft. And most of it is going to be with an ulterior motive. The overwhelming majority of it is going to be with an ulterior motive. You're going to hear things about Kenny Pickett. Pittsburgh, actually, they're not sure about Kenny Pickett now. They like Sam Howell, and it won't be true. That's how this